My name is Emily, and for most of my life I believed that if someone you love betrays you, you feel it. Maybe not immediately, maybe not with proof, but somewhere deep inside, something shifts. Something whispers that things are no longer the same. For 3 years, nothing in my life whispered that about Daniel. Daniel was the kind of person who made everything feel steady. Not dramatic, not loud, not chaotic. Just safe. We met on a quiet Thursday evening at a small bar downtown. I almost didn't go that night. I had just finished a long shift at work, my feet hurt, and all I wanted was to go home and fall asleep. But my friend insisted. I remember walking into that bar and thinking I'd stay for 20 minutes at most. Then I noticed him. Daniel wasn't the loudest guy in the room. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. In fact, he stood slightly apart from the crowd, leaning against the bar with a calm expression, watching people the way someone watches waves at the beach. Quietly, thoughtfully. At some point our eyes met, and he smiled. It wasn't a confident smile. It wasn't flirtatious. It was almost shy, like he didn't want to intrude. Something about it made me smile back. 10 minutes later, we were talking. An hour later, we were still talking. By the time the bartender announced last call, it felt like we had known each other much longer than a single evening. Daniel had this strange way of making conversations feel effortless. There were moments when we spoke for minutes without stopping, and moments when we simply sat in silence without it feeling uncomfortable. That night, when we finally walked outside, the air was cool and the streets were almost empty. I remember thinking that meeting him felt easy, and sometimes easy is exactly what your heart needs. Our relationship didn't explode into something dramatic. It grew slowly, the way morning light fills a room. We started seeing each other more often, walks through the city, coffee in small cafes, long drives with music playing quietly in the background. Daniel never tried to impress me with big gestures. Instead, he noticed things. He remembered how I liked my coffee. He knew I hated horror movies. He could tell when I was tired even before I said a word. After a year, we moved into a small apartment together. It wasn't big. Just a modest place with 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen that barely had enough space for both of us at the same time. But slowly it became ours. Books appeared on the shelves. Our photos found their way onto the walls. The couch developed that comfortable worn-in feeling from too many evenings spent watching movies and talking about nothing. Life with Daniel was calm, predictable, peaceful. He woke up earlier than I did. Every morning I would hear the coffee machine before I even opened my eyes. He always drank his coffee the same way. No sugar, just a little milk. He hated alarm clocks and would sometimes silence them before they even rang. He had a habit of falling asleep with a book in his hands, leaving it open on whatever page he reached. These tiny details slowly became part of my daily life, and I loved them. In 3 years together, Daniel never gave me a reason to doubt him. Not once. We had small disagreements, of course. Everyone does. Dishes left in the sink, being late, stress from work, but nothing serious. Nothing that made me question who he was. That's why the day everything changed feels so strange in my memory, because it started like any other day. Daniel left for work earlier than usual that morning. He was in a rush and almost forgot his scarf. I stood by the window and watched him walk toward his car. Before getting in, he turned around and waved at me. I waved back. At the time, I had no idea that a few hours later I would start questioning everything I thought I knew about him. It was my day off, so I decided to clean the apartment. The kind of deep cleaning you postpone for weeks. I started with simple things: folding clothes, organizing the kitchen, dusting shelves. Eventually, I moved to the closet. That's when I noticed an old box tucked into the corner behind some bags. I pulled it out and placed it on the floor. Inside were small memories from the past 3 years, movie tickets from our first date, postcards from trips we had taken together, a few photographs that we never bothered to frame. I sat on the floor going through them slowly. It felt strangely comforting, like flipping through pieces of our life together. Then I saw the folded piece of paper. It was tucked beneath a few photos. At first I assumed it was just one of our old notes. Daniel and I sometimes left little messages for each other around the apartment. But when I unfolded it, I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was his. That alone didn't seem unusual. What made my chest tighten was the first sentence. I never told her the truth about what happened that night. I blinked and read the line again. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, I could hear distant traffic, but inside the apartment, everything seemed frozen. I continued reading. The letter wasn't written to me. It was addressed to someone named Mark. I knew the name. Mark was one of Daniel's oldest friends. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, like the words had been written quickly. I know I should have told her, the letter said, but if she finds out now, she'll leave. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I simply stared at the paper. My mind started searching desperately for explanations. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was about something else. Maybe I misunderstood, but the words were painfully clear. I made a mistake that night, and I've been pretending it never happened. My hands felt cold. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the letter away. I just sat there on the floor, staring at the page while my thoughts slowly turned darker and darker. For 3 years, I believed I knew Daniel completely. Now a single piece of paper was telling me that there was a part of him I had never seen. A secret. A betrayal. And the worst part was that the letter said he had never told me, which meant he had been living beside me every day while carrying something I didn't know about. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, I folded the letter again, very carefully. I placed it back in the box exactly where I found it. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. If I walked up to Daniel with that letter in my hand, he could say anything. He could deny it, explain it away, convince me that I misunderstood. Words can hide the truth, but behavior can't, so I decided to watch, to listen, to see who Daniel really was when he didn't know I was looking. And somewhere deep inside my mind, a strange idea began to form. If Daniel had secrets, maybe I needed to create one of my own. A few days later, another man walked into my life. His name was Ryan, and without realizing it, he was about to become part of a test that would change everything. Ryan wasn't supposed to matter. At least that's what I told myself the first time I met him. It happened at a small coffee shop near my office. I used to go there sometimes in the afternoons when I needed a quiet place to think. The place smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, and the windows were always fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Ryan worked there. He wasn't the type of guy who immediately draws attention, but he had an easy confidence about him, the kind that makes conversations feel natural even with strangers. The first time we talked, it lasted less than 2 minutes. He asked how my day was going. I answered politely. That should have been the end of it. But when I came back 2 days later, he remembered my name. That small detail stayed with me. Over the next week, I started visiting the coffee shop more often, not because I liked Ryan. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I was there because I had an idea. A test. Something inside me wanted to see how Daniel would react if my attention shifted somewhere else. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough. Ryan made it easy. He liked talking. He liked joking with customers. Sometimes he would sit down for a minute if the cafe wasn't busy. I never told him I had a boyfriend, but I never told him I didn't either. That gray area became part of the strange game I had started playing. At first it felt harmless. A few smiles. A few longer conversations. Once he wrote my name on the coffee cup with a small, smiley face next to it. If someone had told me a month earlier that I would be doing this, I would have laughed. But that letter had changed something inside me. Every evening when Daniel came home from work, I studied him more carefully than before. The way he put his keys on the table. The way he asked about my day. The way he moved through the apartment like someone completely comfortable in his life. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at him, searching for something. Guilt, nervousness, a hidden crack in his calm behavior, but Daniel was the same as always. He kissed me when he came home. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie. He complained about work in the same tired voice he always used. If he had a secret, he hid it perfectly. That made the letter feel even heavier. One evening, about 2 weeks after I found it, I did something different. I mentioned Ryan, not in a dramatic way, just casually while we were eating dinner. I told Daniel about the coffee shop and the guy who worked there. I said Ryan had a good sense of humor. Daniel barely reacted. He nodded and continued eating. At first I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, but later that night, while we were sitting on the couch, he asked a simple question. "How often do you go there?" The tone of his voice was calm. Too calm. I shrugged and said sometimes after work. He nodded again and didn't ask anything else. But I noticed something small. Daniel almost never checked his phone during our evenings together. That night, he looked at it twice. The next week, the strange tension between us began to grow. Not openly. Nothing dramatic, but I could feel it. I started mentioning Ryan more often. Small details, conversations, funny things he said. Each time Daniel listened quietly. Each time his expression remained almost unreadable. But his silence began to feel heavier. One afternoon, Ryan asked if I wanted to take a walk after his shift. For a moment, I hesitated. This was the line between a harmless test and something more real. Then I thought about the letter. About the sentence written in Daniel's handwriting. I never told her the truth about what happened that night. So I said yes. The walk lasted an hour. Ryan talked about traveling, about wanting to move somewhere warmer someday. I mostly listened. At one point he asked if I was seeing anyone. I avoided the question. When I returned home that evening, Daniel was already there. He was standing in the kitchen. Something about the way he looked at me felt different. Not angry, just searching. "Long day?" he asked. I nodded. Then I said something I had planned to say. I met Ryan after work. The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. Daniel leaned against the counter. "For coffee?" he asked. "For a walk?" He looked at me carefully. And for the first time in 3 years, I saw something close to uncertainty in his eyes. That should have satisfied me. But it didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something strange. The test wasn't only about Daniel anymore. It was also about me. About how far I was willing to go just to uncover a truth that might destroy everything. Over the next few days, the tension between us became impossible to ignore. Daniel started asking more questions. Nothing direct, but enough to make it clear that Ryan had begun occupying space in his thoughts. One evening, he finally asked it. "Are you interested in him?" The question landed between us like something fragile. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I had loved for 3 years. The man whose handwriting still echoed in my mind from that letter. And suddenly, I felt tired. Tired of the game, tired of pretending. That night, after dinner, I went to the closet. Daniel watched me quietly as I pulled the old box from the corner. My heart was beating faster than I expected. I opened the box and took out the folded letter. Then I walked back into the living room and placed it on the table between us. Daniel looked at it, then at me. "What is that?" he asked. "I found it while cleaning." He picked up the paper slowly. At first he seemed confused. Then he unfolded it. I watched his eyes move across the page. The moment he recognized his own handwriting, his expression changed. Not with guilt, with shock. For a few seconds he didn't say anything. Then he looked up at me. "Where did you find this?" "In the closet, in the old box." Daniel ran a hand through his hair and sat down. "You read it." It wasn't a question. I nodded. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Finally, I spoke. "You wrote that you betrayed her," I said quietly. Daniel stared at the letter again, then he let out a slow breath. "Emily, this isn't about you." The words confused me. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately understand. "This letter is almost 5 years old," he said. I felt the ground shift beneath my thoughts. "What?" "I wrote it before I ever met you." For a moment, my mind refused to accept the sentence. Daniel continued speaking slowly. "It was about someone I dated before you. Her name was Laura. Our relationship ended badly. I made a mistake, and I wrote that letter to Mark because I didn't know how to deal with it." My chest tightened. "But the letter says you never told her." "I didn't," Daniel said quietly. "She found out another way, and we broke up a few weeks later." He looked around the room, then back at me. "I kept the letter because it reminded me of the kind of person I never wanted to be again." My thoughts felt like they were collapsing inward. All the suspicions, all the tests, Ryan, the tension, everything had been built on a misunderstanding. Daniel's voice became softer. "Emily, why didn't you just ask me?" I didn't have a good answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. Because somewhere deep inside, I had been afraid that asking would confirm my worst fear. Instead, I had chosen silence. Chosen suspicion. Chosen a game that slowly began to damage the very thing I was trying to protect. Daniel looked at me again, more carefully now. "Who is Ryan?" he asked. The question hung in the air. For the first time since this all began, I felt the weight of what I had done. Ryan had been part of a test, but Daniel didn't know that. And maybe he never would fully understand. "I met him at a coffee shop," I said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't look angry, he looked hurt, and somehow that felt worse. The letter lay on the table between us. A piece of paper that had never been meant to change our lives. A letter that had never been meant for me to read. And yet, it had nearly destroyed the quiet trust we had built over 3 years. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people hide. They're the ones we create in our own minds. That night, Daniel folded the letter again and placed it back in the box. Neither of us spoke for a long time. But eventually, he reached for my hand. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because some things are worth trying to repair. Even after the truth finally arrives.